Hey everyone, welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm your host, Emily. Each week I interview a new transgender or non-binary person, and we share our stories in hopes that it helps other people in the community to feel like they're not alone. My guest tonight, I'm extremely excited about. It's Becky Heineman. She is a video game and video game programming legend. She was the first person ever to win a national video game championship, a founding member of Interplay games, responsible for over 250 different game titles, and basically had a hand in anything Interplay did from the early 80s to the early 90s because she was basically their programming guru there. She did work for EA and Activision and worked on basically anything program related in her spare time, freelance, contracting, and did a hand scanner for Apple. Welcome to the show, Becky Heineman.
Hello there, everybody. Glad to meet you all.
First off, on your site, you identify yourself as a woman and as a mother. Did you used to be more public about the fact that you're trans? Is that an aspect of your identity that you have kind of gotten past, or that you keep a little bit more private?
No, being trans is one of those things where I'm too famous to. I would literally have to restart my life under a new, go into witness protection for all intents and purposes in order for me to hide the fact that I am transgender.
Okay.
Years ago when I was doing my games back in the 80s, 90s, and so forth, I went by the pseudonym Burger because I did not want to leave a trail of games with a name that I would have to disavow in my later years. So I was kind of planning my transition for a very long time.
Okay. Let's get into your programming gaming history, and then we'll get into the history of your transition and all of that aspect. Let me just run through the history really quick, and then feel free to stop me and add anything if you need to. I'm just going to give a quick overview so people can get up to speed on who you are. Your friend pushes you into entering a Space Invaders tournament in the Valley in California. You win that, and that sends you to New York. You win that and become the first person ever to win a national video game championship. You're our first esports champion. That leads you to meet and network with publishers and work on stories and work with them for books and magazines as basically a video game consultant on how to beat video games. And then one of those publishers makes a connection for you with Avalon Hill a game company in Maryland. You go to work for them at the age of 14, lying about your age.
Yeah, I lied about my age a lot of times.
So my first question along those lines is, why did your parents let a 14-year-old kid move to Maryland to start work at the ripe old age of 14?
You should have asked the question, did I have parents? During my youth, I was beaten and emotionally and physically by my parents for all of my memory. And what happened was that when I was around my 14th, 15th birthday, around my 15th birthday, somewhere just before that, I ran away from home. Okay. And I was homeless, lived near a dumpster, behind a grocery store. Then I got myself a job at JCPenney, at first their gas station at Whitwood Mall. Then I worked in their warehouse in the toy department when the Atari 2600 came out, and I was actually there at the toy store selling Atari 2600s. That was how I was supporting myself. Mm-hmm. After this time in my life, I found out my parents divorced because occasionally I went home to see if it was safe for me to return. And then I found my mom had moved away from my dad. The dad was the one who was causing much of the abuse. My mom was an enabler, but her hands were not clean either. But I was able to move back in with my mom, and it was only maybe 2 or 3 months later was when the contest happened. And then there was the Atari stuff and so on. But when I got the job offer to go work at the Avalon Hill Game Company, the game you're talking about in Towson, Maryland, I was on the phone. They told me, hey, we want to hire you. And they hired me right on that initial phone call. So I just simply packed up my stuff in a big steamer truck And I had the next day, a letter came overnight that had my plane ticket in it. And then as I was walking out the door, my mother asked, "Where are you going?" And I just turned, without even looking at her, I just kept walking and said, "Out." And I remember that very vividly. And I got into the taxi I called, and then he took me to the airport, and that was the end of it.
Wow. Yeah,
I never returned.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that didn't come up in anything that I came across. So I apologize for stepping in that one.
No, well, the trouble is that it's an aspect of my life that I generally keep very private, only because, I'd rather be remembered for the things I've accomplished, not to be pitied by the fact that I had an absolutely and utterly miserable childhood, which is why I had, so little money that in a way it was the big motivation for me to teach myself how to do electronics, how to program computers, how to do this, because no one was going to help me, and I had to be pretty self-sufficient by the time I was 14.
Wow.
And there are aspects I haven't even said about, because now I know in hindsight what really happened, which makes it even worse.
So was any of that part of the fact that you were trans? Did that factor in at that point at all? Or it was.
When I was being beaten, I noticed that my father didn't beat my two younger brothers. I was the only one being singled out.
Mm-hmm.
So internally, I already knew I was different. So that in my own mind allowed me to take the abuse because I thought I deserved it. Because I wasn't like my brothers. I wasn't normal. I wasn't a straight boy who did all stuff. I was a girl. But of course I was, they tell me I was otherwise. So I knew there was something wrong with me but back in the 70s, there was no TV or media or anything that would even say what transgender is.
No. In the 80s and even into the early 90s, there weren't any positive examples of what being transgender was. Even when they started to come out, it was on tabloid shows, Maury Povich and things like that, Jerry Springer, and so they were always really negative.
Yeah, they're very negative, and they always showed them as like one step away from being a prostitute, or they project them as mentally ill. They were not positive role models when you think about the way they presented transgender people on Maury Povich, on Jerry Springer, especially Jerry Springer. Even Oprah and Sally Jesse Raphael, when they presented them, they were very, very rarely did they present them in a positive light.
Yeah.
So I had no frame of reference. When I'm like a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old girl, I just took it. And it wasn't until I was around 14-ish when I got the courage to just say, you know what, I don't know what's out there, but it's definitely better than what I'm dealing with here. Mm-hmm. And of course, my own transgenderism just told me that I deserve to be homeless. I deserve to be punished because I am weird. I am different. Of course, today, I would have, if I was a 10-year-old today, I would already be on surfing the web. I would see some websites and I would see the word transgender and I would say, there's a whole bunch of people that are just like me. Mm-hmm. And my life would have been vastly different than what I endured back in the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. So you knew pretty much from the start then that you were trans.
Well, I never knew I was trans until like in my late 20s, because that's when I discovered what being trans is. All I knew was I was a girl and trapped in a boy's body, and that it made me, that by telling anybody this, I would be a social pariah. What had happened was that I kept who I was, truly who I was, a secret, until I joined up electronic arts. It was the first time I actually had a job, because up until then, it was my first time I had a job since Interplay. Because at Interplay, I was one of the owners of the company, so I really had a special privilege in addition to being there drawing a salary. And 11 and a half years went by, then I moved on to form Logicware, and then later on Contraband Entertainment. In both cases, I owned the company. And so, again, I had a special privilege there. But in 2003, Electronic Arts came by and says, hey, here's a giant bag of money if you come join us as an employee. And I'm like, constantly starving for projects. bag of money. I'll take the bag of money. Within a few weeks of working there, I read their HR manual, their policy. It had a full plan on how to transition, saying, if you are transgender, you contact HR, you contact your manager. Here's how you do the bathrooms. Here, and of course, they even said, if people bully you, we will fire the people who bully you. And that is when I actually first entertained the idea of coming out. Shortly thereafter, I started a blog on LiveJournal and started writing out stuff. Now, of course, nobody knew, nobody at work at the time, maybe one or two friends were actually reading the journal, and they realized I outed myself to them. But it was like 5 or 6 months later, because I was going through therapy, I was doing all the appropriate stuff, when I finally followed the rules, saying, went to HR, went to my manager, and it couldn't have been more seamless, because my manager, bless his heart, was that I told him who I was, I told him what was going on, and his response was, can you still code? And I go, yeah. Still gonna do your job? Yeah. Then get back to work. And that was the end of the conversation. And he was one of my staunchest defenders. And from that moment on, I came out to the world. In fact, I posted up, I think it was early 2005 when I actually, because I was out at EA for at least 3 or 4 months to everybody doing that stuff until I finally went to the public and say, hey, I'm here. And then it was only a few months after that I finally went to have my first surgery, which was to do the face. And it's been smooth sailing ever since.
That's so wonderful to have that support. And that's kind of what we all strive to get to, right? Is that I'm transgender. Okay, so what? Like, now what? That was something that Eddie Izzard said that I really loved. We don't want it to be a thing at all. We're just here, we're women, all good, move on.
I mean, I hope one day, may not be my generation, but maybe your generation or the generation following you, in which being transgender is about as interesting as what color is your hair. And therein is, we're moving closer to what I hope would be a perfect world.
Closer. We're inching, but we're getting there, right?
We're getting there.
Have you run into any roadblocks or any kind of speed bumps since coming out in the gaming industry outside of EA?
Only at the beginning. After leaving EA, I did projects for other companies, and I did find, also, when I came out, I did lose friends. They're people who I've known for decades, and even to this day, they refuse to talk to me. I don't understand why, because even though it's now been decades and they themselves must have seen stories of transgender people in the media, TV, news, etc., but for their choice, they simply do not want to return any messages I send to them. And like in one case, I actually bumped into one of my old friends at a gaming trade show, and he just turned around and walked away. But thankfully, a majority of my friends are still my friends. And over the time, they've now bonded with the new me, but it's really, they could see how much happier I was, because they could see how before they always knew there was something about me that was sad. I try to mask it with humor and try to mask it, but you could still see through the veneer that something was off. But now, in the last almost 2 decades now, they say I'm just more outgoing, more happy, more energetic. I have a glow about me, which never existed in the before times.
Yeah.
And therefore, and of course, my only regret of coming out was that I wish I'd done it earlier. But then again, Electronic Arts made it so painless and so easy that it may be putting a bubble around me, because, I still know around the 2003, 2004 time, still a difficult time for people to come out.
Yeah.
But, today it's a lot easier. But back then, all it would have taken is just one homophobic manager who would work behind the scenes to stab me in the back to make my life miserable. I did not have that.
Was that one of the reasons that you didn't come out when you were working at the companies that you owned? Was there a fear that, like, if someone at the top of the company that public facing was trans, that it would interfere with your ability to get work?
Well, in a way, yes. What happened was, like at Interplay, I knew some of the people at the top were homophobic. In fact, they were also very misogynistic. So I knew Interplay, there was no way in hell that I was going to come out. And it was my biases, my fears were confirmed, because in 1994-95, we had one person actually come out at Interplay. And the abuse I saw they put that girl through confirmed everything that I knew, or at least everything I suspected about the latent homophobia and misogyny that was at the top. So it kept my mouth shut. Now, when I formed Logicware after leaving Interplay, I was just more focused on just running the company and keeping my family, fed, because when you run a company, the finances just overwhelm you. But there was that thing in the back of my mind, knowing that if I came out, who would work for me? Who would come take a job from a transgender person? Especially, this was 1995-96. Not exactly a good year for trans people to come out. Thankfully, everybody followed me when we formed Contraband Entertainment in late 99. And then it lasted 4 years when EA came in and just scooped us up and brought us into the fold. And then, of course, my fears were confirmed, because some of the people who worked for me were more like, I really work with them. They don't work for me, I work with them. Some of them are on that list of people who are never speaking to me again. So therefore, it confirmed that had I been CEO of the company and came out, I would have had several people's resignations.
Yeah, and then when you have when it's a small team, you can't lose half the team and still have the company stay afloat. That makes perfect sense.
It wasn't half; it was like 2 people, but one of them was a key person, and he was irreplaceable. And had he left me while we were in certain parts of the lifespan of Contraband Entertainment, it would have killed the company. Because I didn't have the kind of cash reserves to be able to find a person of his caliber and bring him into the company. Because a person like that would have demanded a piece of the company or something like that. So there you go.
I love something that former guest and a friend said on the show, actually, that when those people leave, those people that can't accept you or whatever, they leave, it's just the trash taking itself out. And I love that. I love that statement.
In some ways, it is like one of the 2 people. One of them I would consider the trash taking himself out. He was somebody who, he was a valuable person in the company. I mean, everybody was. Let's just be blunt. Everybody at the company contributed something. But it's one where he would have been easy to replace. But the other one, that hurt, because he was a very, very close friend of mine. I was helping him with his wedding. Just so many ups and downs, and we worked on so many projects together, and I consider him, even to this day, a dear, dear friend. But he made his choice that he just did not think that our friendship should continue as me being who I truly am. And that's one where I'm saddened by this, that he made that choice. But again, it's his choice, not my choice. So I've moved on, made a whole bunch of new friends, and I really do have hundreds of friends, real friends. And I know this for sure because, it's been known, if you follow my Twitter feed, about a little over 3 months ago, 4 months ago, I fell and broke my leg.
Oh, wow.
And even now, I'm still using a walker to get around.
Oh, poor girl.
But the number of people who sent me well wishes, some people who even helped donate to help my medical expenses, and the number of people who came even during this pandemic to come and help do things like lift up blinds, move my computers around, and so forth. All volunteers. And all it is because they said, "Hey, can you help me?" And then they said, "When do you want me to arrive?" Those are friends.
Yeah.
So I know I have good friends. So, other people could join my ranks of friends, but it's their choice. Just like, I could join other people's ranks of friends only if they will have me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the misogyny that you ran into even in your group of closest friends. I loved hearing about when you were working on Bard's Tale 3, and you made it a point to add in female characters and characters of color, more diversity in there. And Michael Cranford, the original creator, the creator of the seed that became Bard's Tale, told you that girls don't play games, and that's why there weren't female characters.
Yeah, and he said this directly to me. He's today denying that he ever said that, but I will never forget it because, here it is, I'm a girl. He didn't know at the time. Mm-hmm. But he said it to me, and it burned into my head because I was really pissed off when he said that. Because
I can imagine.
Here it is, I'm playing all these games at Interplay, creating them. I'm working on Bard's Tale, the tools and the port to the 2GS and all the other stuff, and I'm playing the game, and he just says to my face, girls don't play these games. Again, that was like around 1985, 86. Mm-hmm. Outing myself means I would be out of a career and be pumping gas again. And of course, if you look at Michael Cranford, he's since then gone on to seminary, and now he is a minister, I believe, and so forth. He, just Google him. You could find all that information on your own. But it explains a lot. It explains his misogyny and his conservatism and his rigidity. But the thing is I did ask him several times, why can't we just have female characters? It's not that hard to implement. So when I took over the project and made Bard's Tale 3, the first thing I did with that code was to put in female characters. And it only took about a week worth of work. And because I had to implement a pronoun system, the game itself didn't really have pronouns, such as like when a monster is hit, you have to say blah, blah, and killing him, and killing her, killing it, or killing the name. Mm-hmm. So I had 4 different pronouns, and I had to implement that, and it had put the pronoun support in your character's creation, and then just put 2 different lists of pictures. One is for all pictures for the male version of the classes, one's for the female version of the classes, and then I just had the art done, and there we go, female characters. It was that simple. Mm-hmm. And of course, for true equality, being male or female in Bard's Tale 3 gives you nothing. There is no stat boost whatsoever for being a male or a female. It's just how you want to represent yourself, because I didn't want to change play balance that way. Since then, of course, I rewrote the entire game using an engine I created, and that's what Bard's Tale 3 shipped with. But it was made from the ground up to say, hey, look, female characters. And when people played Bard's Tale 3, it got critically acclaimed, and people made note of the fact that I can now adventure as a female with a female avatar in my party. And people enjoyed that.
So Bard's Tale 3 that sounds like that was one of the first games to have that ability. Was it the first?
I'm not sure. It's possible Ultima 1 or 2 might have beaten me on that one.
Okay.
But that's something, you may want to do a little research to figure that out. I mean, for the Bard's Tale series, I can tell you was the first one that had female characters. Mm-hmm. But I would probably say that another game may have beaten me to it, but who knows? But definitely
one of the first games at Interplay then that featured female characters.
Oh yeah, it was the first game because to put it in perspective, it was the first. Bard's Tale was the first games that had characters. Because beforehand, when I did Mind Shadow, Tracer Sanction, Borrowed Time, Pastimes, and Tone Town, the protagonist was a character the game already had, and you just played the role of the protagonist. Which, by the way, in all 4 games was male. Mm-hmm. But later on, because I know I tried to get a female protagonist for Pastimes and Tone Town, I was shot down because somebody at the top was a misogynist. So,
going back to when you came out and you had a lot of negativity, did you have any people that supported you that you weren't expecting? As you start to see some of these people fall off, then did you have other people you're like, well, that person will probably go too, and then they surprised you with their level of support?
Oh yeah, there were quite a few people who I thought were going to be raving misogynists because they were kind of misogynists to other people, but they were some of my more ardent supporters, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll take that. It's the adage of you never really know who your friends are until you meet them, and they will surprise you. Some people who you think are going to leave you high and dry are the ones throwing you a life preserver, where others who you could swear are going to have your back are the ones who disappear when the chips are down. Mm-hmm. And this is the way it was. I mean, while overall a majority of people were supportive, with a large minority ambivalent, in which they're like, you're trans, I'll accept it. Not really cool with it, but I'll accept it. Mm-hmm. And then the small minority, which is like, don't ever call me again.
That's a thing that I think a lot of us have found, and it's kind of wonderful. There are those ones that you lose, like you said, that really pain you. But for the most part, I find that the people that support you are the lion's share. It's the bigger group by far.
Yeah,
and that's a wonderful feeling.
Thinking about it, I think the person who shocked me the most, who accepted me, was my mother.
Wow.
My father had already passed away when I came out, mm-hmm. so that's one that will always be a what if. But my mom, while she was very sick and so forth, and we had been estranged for quite some time, I contacted her, then I came out to her, and she was like, whatever makes you happy. And I was absolutely convinced she was going to yell expletives at me, demand money from me, because that's what she usually did, and hang up. But no, she was actually loving and supporting. And that's the person who I think I would have to say shocked the heck out of me.
Wow. So then towards that last kind of twilight period of her life, were you guys able to kind of establish a little bit of a relationship then?
We did. It was during her last year of life. My mom was a chain smoker, so that's why her life was cut quite short. But during her last year, she started coming around and realizing what she had done to me. And then that's when she confessed to me what really was going on and what the real life story, which really reads like an episode of Law and Order SVU, which is like, okay, I didn't see that coming. Uh-huh. But she then, after she let go of her sin, confessed her sins, she then just started actually acting like a mom. My only thoughts was, I could have used you when I was 10 years old. But I took what I could get, which was just, hey, hi, Mom. Call her from time to time. And then I got the news one day that she wasn't with us anymore because the lung cancer, emphysema, chain smoking, took her.
Mm-hmm. Did you find community at EA? Were there other LGBT people there? Or when did you first find a good, solid LGBT community to be a part of?
My very first one was EAGL, EAGL, which is the Gay and Lesbians of Electronic Arts. And I reached out to them shortly after I came out and went to their, it's not really support group, it's their meetings and just stuff like that. Then I went to the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, where I helped contribute money to them. I went ahead and volunteered for them. I even did some talks and stuff there. Mm-hmm. They were not public events. They were kind of like, they were bringing the trans people from the trans community, and they were all kind of under the radar. And then I would just go ahead and talk to them and give them hope, because again, back in 2003 to 2005, when I was doing this, it was still one of those where a majority of trans people kept their mouths shut about who they were. So they would only be themselves in these meetings or at certain bars and clubs. Whereas when they went back home to their families and jobs, they were once again donning the mask of the lives that they were supposed to live, not the lives that they should be living. Mm-hmm. But since then, I've worked at the Dallas Resource Center, because I went to Dallas, worked there, then in LA. But since then, I'm now one of the people helping with GLAAD, GLAAD. I was one of its board members and helping, getting money contributed to good works. And I'm their consultant on the video game field. So they contact me all the time about, hey, this video game, what do you think? What we should do about it? And I tell them what I think should be done, and then they act upon it.
You've also been part of various other company internal groups, LGBT groups, correct? You were the transgender chair at Amazon, right?
Yeah, I was at Glamazon. I was one of its chairs for about 4 or 5 months because my tenure there wasn't really that long. I was at Glamazon. I was at Gleam, which is the gay and lesbian employees at Microsoft. Okay. GLEAM. Isn't that really cute?
Yeah. These are all cute. I love all these.
But at Sony, what was funny was that I actually had people coming up to me. I mean, there was an employee at Sony who was married, had a child, and then he took me aside and we had several coffees where he came up to me as being gay and asked me for advice on who do I go to? How do I come out to my wife? How do I come out that I have a boyfriend? And blah, blah, blah. And I helped him get through it all. And now, of course, divorce. I mean, that's a sad story, but straight woman, gay man, doesn't really work out. But he's now with his husband and with his son, and they're living a very, very happy life. So it ended with a happy ending. But it was because I've been very public and very open about both my sexuality and about my history that people feel confident coming out to me and just asking for at least, the first steps in getting, not necessarily advice, because what I usually do is I just tell them, hey, you live in such and such. These are the organizations you should contact for the first steps of just exploring who you are. Because, it's not my place to tell people what to do. It's my place to just say, here's some therapists you should talk to.
Yeah.
And, and occasionally I get the weirdos, which is ones where they're not really trans. They're just pervs. And I would send them over to like rehab or to say, you keep going down this path, you're going to be spending your life in jail. Stop it. And only in one case, after I got the conversation done, I had to call the police because of what he was saying and what he was thinking. And I'm like, you need a lot more help than I could ever hope to give you.
Do you have any advice for people that are chairing or part of those groups? Like, what are some of the key things that you need to remember and that you need to work on?
Well, getting one of the groups going is very, very simple. You just simply have to create the group. Just announce that it exists. If you're at a small business or small company, you just simply say, hey, I want to create a LGBT plus, we usually call them affinity groups, in which there's no membership or anything. It's just saying, hey, you are LGBT and you want to promote healthy examples of role model issues of being LGBT, come to our meeting once a month in the lunchroom. Or, if you feel the environment's not open to having such an affinity group on premises, just say, hey, we're going to the Olive Garden and meeting and having lunch over there, and then we can talk. That's, again, back to there is no one size fits all. But, if there's a group, join it. If there's no group, start it. Because groups don't start on their own. They have to be done by somebody who's willing to put in the work. And there's work. I mean, it's not like, hey, we have an affinity group and that's all the work you need to do. No, you got to say, start planning the agenda, start talking, what it is that what is the problem you're trying to solve? I mean, if the company's already so pro-LGBT that there's rainbows painted on the walls, you may not necessarily need an affinity group. But if it's a place where people may feel, that there's an employee who's a misogynist or something like that, then you already know, okay, the company's not getting rid of these people. Maybe we should make an affinity group, and then together as a block, once the numbers are large enough, then we could talk to HR and say, you know what, misogyny is not cool. Homophobia is not cool. And I'm speaking for a group of 10 people or 20 people. And that carries a lot of weight than you just going in by yourself and saying, hey, we should change this policy or something. But it always goes back to, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Like, does HR have a transgender policy? If not, then your affinity group can sit down and write one. Or you could just simply get the EA handbook and copy and paste. I mean, that's that's what we did in some places. Just took somebody's what seems to be well thought out strategy, copy and paste it, change it to be more in line with the company values, and then now you have a policy. But policies don't appear because of magic. They appear because somebody took the time and did the work to get it done.
How did you meet Janelle?
She came out to me.
Oh.
Even to this day, I have people, random strangers who would contact me through Messenger, Skype, now Discord, who would say, hey, I'm struggling. And then I would say, hey, what's going on? We'd talk, develop a friendship. And in most cases, I would give them the resources they need, and I would never hear from them again. Other people would come back every now and then and we'd talk. Janelle, on the other hand, we just kept talking and started becoming friends because we had so much in common. I mean, she's in the game industry, I'm in the game industry. She's an artist, I'm a programmer. Where we're opposites in that field, we are complement, because I keep saying, hey, I need art for the games I'm writing because I can't draw. And she's like, hey, I need a programmer for the games I like to do because I can't program. Teamwork. But as time went on, our friendship went on, and we were just friends for well over a year. Nothing more than friends. But then one day she wanted to have a birthday party to make up for the previous birthday party. She had at the time, she had a wife, and they planned this birthday party for her, and no one came. So she was all bummed out about the fact that none of her friends from work came to her birthday party. Well, a year later, she'd already now divorced, she's moved on with her life, and she's on the verge of coming out. I suggested, why don't you come over? She's living in Atlanta at the time, and I lived in the Bay Area. And I said, why don't you come over, spend your birthday over at my place, and I'll give you a tour through San Francisco, and you could be you. This is like her coming out and dressing up as herself. Because she's in a town no one knows her. She could be safe and be public because there's no possibility that anyone from work can accidentally bump into her.
That complete safe environment. Yeah, perfect.
So she flew out. I then first took her to an affinity group meeting of Gleam, Microsoft, where she's like, I'm in a room filled with LGBT game developers. I am embarrassed, but it broke the ice. And then after that, I then took her to the pier, took her all the way up around Fisherman's Wharf. I took her around all of this, and we just had a wonderful weekend. But that's what kind of started her having the hots for me. But at the time, I would just still viewed her as my friend. Sent her home. But then after that, we would kept talking on Skype, and it was mostly Skype. And we would just, every day, we'd just have each other on Skype and just tell each other what's going on. And then one day I just noticed that when I was telling her about the fact I had a date with someone and it didn't turn out really well, I saw like her face like flinched. And I realized, wait a minute, do you have feelings for me? I just asked her, flat point blank. And she goes, maybe. She goes, let's give it a show. Let's give this a go. And she's like, whee! And well, the fun thing is that it's after 6 months, we were pretty much inseparable, and that wasn't much longer after that when we became a couple, and we've been together ever since. We're bordering now on 9 years, 8-9 years together.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And obviously we are working out, because I can attest that during this entire time, we've never raised our voices to either of us. I mean, I've never had to raise my voice to her. She's never had to raise her voice to me. We're always like adults. When we do have disagreements, we talk about it like adults and work it out. And to me, that's like so different from relationships I had in the past, where I had, my first wife, she was constantly, she would be the nag where she would tell me, do this, do that, yelling at me, and we were never a team.
Mm-hmm.
And then another relationship, which I found she was kind of like bipolar, and that didn't help. And I dated other people, which they all had, the chemistry just wasn't there, but nothing compared to the violence that I saw with my own family, my mother and father. It's like something straight out of a police drama where, my dad would be breaking things and hitting either me over the head with a plate or my mom with a plate, or bashing our heads against the wall and so forth. And of course, for me, I thought that was a relationship because that's obviously how families exist.
Yeah.
But, being with Janelle has taught me what a real relationship is like. And it's one where that I really see myself dying of old age with her.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful, especially since, like you said, you came from that horrible example, and you left before you really got to see any resolution to it. So that's really commendable, and I love that you were able to find that with her. You guys are the perfect pairing there. I love the compliments of the programmer and the artist. There's just so many aspects of that are perfect. Mm-hmm. How did you choose your name? Where did Rebecca come from?
Really, it's that it came from my old nickname. I had Burger followed by the old name, and I thought what would work with Burger? So it's Burger Betty, Burger Becky, Burger Barbara. And Becky was the one that I just rolled off the tongue. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to make sure, because I was still, when I was about ready to come out, I made a whole roadmap of what to do and what to avoid. One of the examples was like, when I was at therapy and group sessions, I saw some trans girls with names like Electra, names with, like Candy and so forth. I'm like, how are you expect to be taken seriously if your name is Candy? Mm-hmm. Of course, just with an I and some weird spellings and Electra and all these really like names a 9-year-old girl would come up with. Uh-huh. I was like, no, I want professional. Rebecca Ann Heineman. That sounds like a name of a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And that's where Burger Becky works. So Becky is Rebecca. My middle name should be about as boring as possible, Ann. So Rebecca Ann Heineman, Esquire. Okay, that works. There's my name.
That's wonderful. Do you actually have Esquire legally in your name?
No, I be a lawyer or something like that. But it's back to, would it sound good with the word Esquire after it? Would it sound like Dr. Rebecca Ann Heineman? Would you see President Rebecca Ann Heineman? Does the name sound something so boring, so formal, something that would appear on the top of a resume that no one would do a double take at all and think that this person, obviously by her name, must be someone that has at least a tiny bit of credibility to it.
So when you were going through all of this and choosing your name and all of these things, you didn't have did you have a transgender role model? Did you have anybody you could look to? No.
Nope.
Just trailblazing.
I was trailblazing my own mind. See, the thing is, I didn't know about Lynn Conway till later. If I had known about her, I would consider her the kind of role model I had. But the only people that I knew of was like Danny Bunton, who was essentially ostracized from her family. The person who worked at Interplay, I will not say her name out of privacy reasons. But I saw them both come out and they were completely smashed. So they were not exactly role models, because they were more role models. Why should I keep my mouth shut?
Unfortunately, yeah. The sad truth of it.
Yeah, so that's the kind of role models I had at the time I was coming out. I just was one where, I'm going in. I have this, what I hope is a shield with EA's HR policy, and thank goodness it actually worked. Even with the EA HR thing, I had never seen anybody come out and succeed. Mm-hmm. So I was scared out of my mind. So I actually had a plan B. As I was doing my therapy and stuff like that and preparing to come out to the whole company, I was already saving up money and getting a loan so I can then go ahead and get my facial surgery. The whole plan was, if I got fired or somehow forced out, I would have my face, and then I could essentially start from a clean slate, maybe change my last name.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be Rebecca Ann Smith or something like that, and just say I'm a good programmer. And, nobody cares what's between your legs when you're going for a job interview, but they sure as hell care about your face.
Okay.
And I had my face done, but thankfully it turned out that I didn't need to invoke Plan B because of EA. But after I'd left Electronic Arts, I had numerous times where I'd be working with somebody and they would say, "So do you have a brother? Because I know there's this person named Heineman who did Bard's Tale and so forth, and you look kind of like him." And I go I had one person who thought I was his wife, and even sent me what was it? A request for job interview saying, "Hey, we found you're a programmer, and man, if this guy is your brother and you're just as good as him, we want you on the team. And also, could you put a good word in for him so he could join too?" And I then had to pick up the phone and give him the call. Uh-huh. To which he was like, he wasn't deterred by it. Says, "Okay, cool, twofer. We get a diversity hire and we get this programmer who's an insane person."
Oh, that's amazing. When it does this, when it makes the switch from, it being a negative to where it's a positive, and companies view it as, we get to check off a diversity box there.
Yeah, I get those too. But the real thing is just that the fact that they never even suspected I was trans. Now, of course, not long after that, I had the full surgery, so I'm now 100%. Mm-hmm. But the whole issue is that the first impression is always the best, and when they saw my face, it gave me jobs. So to me, it was the most. It was the best money I ever spent. It was a lot of money to do this, but and it hurt like heck. I could tell you, it's like it felt like torture for a couple of weeks during the healing process. But afterwards, it opened so many doors for me for my career that it's one of the reasons why I am as successful as I am today, because the fact that I looked the part. And we still, even to this day, have first impression bias.
Mm-hmm. Your voice is perfectly feminine. How long did that take?
I practiced it in my car, driving to and from Electronic Arts for about 6 months.
Okay.
The biggest problem comes back to practice. I just put in the work. Every day, my drive was a half an hour each way, and I first had voice tapes. I went to a voice therapist for a little while, and then it was just practice. And one of my biggest practices, I wrote these novels, Sailor Moon fan fiction, and I recorded audiobooks of them. It was to force me to speak in my voice. So I have old recordings in which I listen to them and says, "Man, that sounds masculine." Then I have later tapes, I would just listen to them and I go like, "It's the voice you're hearing right now." And that's when I go, okay, I'm listening to tape. It sounds very feminine. I've got the inflections. And so what's funny is the inflections and my manner of speaking, I didn't change any of that because I was already speaking like a girl since I was little.
Oh, okay.
But the higher pitch and so forth, and the use of the nose and so forth, that was practice. And now it's practiced to the point where it's just second nature. I don't even think about it anymore. I mean, to me, this is my natural voice. I mean, in fact, for me to try the old voice again, I actually have to do the equivalent of voice acting. I would have to, okay, how would I speak? Okay, how would you speak? Like, I could speak like Sparkle, or what was it? Like, they tell me I have a good George Takei. Oh my. Like that. But again, it's voice acting. Mm-hmm. And right now, this is my natural voice. When I don't even think about speaking, this is it. But it's only because I spent easily 6 months practicing at least an hour a day for 6 months. So if anybody out there thinks that they could change their voice in a weekend and have a perfectly natural sounding voice, I've also got this bridge in Brooklyn I can sell you. Got to put in the work. And that's been one of my pet peeves all throughout my career and so forth, where I would see people who think success comes easily or success comes naturally. Success only, my whole career, the only reason I'm successful is I put in the work. You don't want to know how many hours I had to work to get all those games written. They don't write themselves. Those are just hard work. And I use that very same drive. The drive I use to be able to learn how to program in C, learn to program in assembly, teach myself computer programming and hardware. I just applied it to changing my voice, changing my mannerisms, acting feminine instead of masculine, unlearning and then learning again. So put in the work.
Are there any things that make you feel dysphoric these days? It sounds like you've completely mastered it. Once you got the facial surgery and worked on your voice, it sounds like you just kind of passed completely. The
dysphoria ended about a year after people couldn't clock me anymore. About for me, it was around 2008, 2009. Was when I really truly realized that I made it. And this is a funny story. I took a contract at a company called Sensory Sweep. They're based in Salt Lake City. They don't exist anymore, but they were run by a bunch of Mormons. And in fact, almost all the employees were Mormons. The boss knew me as all my career, so he already knew I was trans. Okay. But he never bothered to tell anybody at the company I was trans.
Okay.
What had happened was that on my first day of work, I came in and I saw this circular cubicle which had some 8 or 9 desks inside of it, and there was 4 or 5 people looking over the wall, looking over at the front desk of the office. I came in through the back because I went to go talk to the CEO to finalize my paperwork, show my passport, get the I-9 stuff done. So even though I'm a contractor, I still had to do the legal stuff. So I then went up behind these guys and I could hear them talk. So when's he coming? Because what's going on? It's a guy in a dress. It's like, how do you know? So I just did Google search on the name. Blah blah blah. I could spot a trans person a mile away. And so I was standing there. I'm just like, okay, hey guys. They look at me. It's like, and they look back to the front. It's like, who's just some girl? It's like, okay, what's that? It's like, he's looking, and it's like, hey, I'm supposed to talk to you guys. It's like, and they look at me again. It's like, yeah, who are you? It's like, I'm new here. So, oh, cool. HR's over there, and the artist stations is over there. It's like, okay. And then once again, they go back looking at the desk. It's like, alrighty then. So I just sat down and just watched them, dig their own graves for a few more minutes. And I then said, look, dudes, I'm a programmer. So it's like, wow, a girl programmer. Wow. And then that's when they all start huddling around me going like, hey, girl, I want to go on a date. Says, hey, you're a little old for me. It's like, well, dudes, chill. And then that's when I said, look, I'm your new programmer. I'm working with your team, and I'm doing this with. So it's like, but who are you? So I'm Becky Heineman. So it's like, and then one guy looks to the other, and like, you lied to me. It's really a girl. Where did you hear this stuff right there? Blah blah. And they were arguing over each other about the fact that this one guy, who obviously did the Googling, must have been mistaken. And I'm just sitting there, just like, I don't give a shit. Just show me the source repository is, so I can go ahead and get to work. And then a couple of weeks later was when they then realized the guy was telling the truth. And they were like, are you transgender? That's not what my church told me. That's supposed to be a guy in a dress. It's like, I'm a girl in a dress. What'd you expect? It's like, I didn't expect you. And over the course of the next couple of months, I educated a lot of people there about that their church was lying to them and that this is what a transgender person is. And I ended it with saying, like, do you think I should be going into the men's room? It's like, no. In fact, I'd be weirded out if you were in the men's room. It's like, good. Now you're learning.
That's such a wonderful story. I love the fact of just making him twist in the wind for a little bit before you really did it.
Oh yeah, when I realized that it's just a girl, and I'm like, okay, I'm definitely a girl because I'm being treated with just as much. No one gives a shit about me, and they're like, oh, she can't be a programmer. She's a girl. Okay, obviously I've completely transitioned.
Yeah, it's such a bizarre industry for you to have worked in. It's this boys club industry, and either way you were damned. If you're trans or if you're a woman, either way, they have something against you.
Well, it's the adage, like you've read articles recently about Black people who have skin light enough that they're mistaken for being white.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, they get to hear what white people actually say to each other when they don't think a Black person's around. Uh-huh. It's not pretty. Same goes for me. There were numerous times, especially at Interplay, when I was around a bunch of men, which in most cases that was everywhere, in which they would say some of the most misogynistic, demeaning things about women, and I had to keep my mouth shut because there's a woman among them, but because they didn't know that, they were being open and frank about how much they treated women as objects. It's very, very eye-opening.
It really stops you in your tracks of like, well, is this something I really want to do? Because, I'm just going to subject myself to all this horrible hatred and misogyny and just general weirdness from the general population.
Yep. Well, one thing that I have an advantage is because the fact that I did enjoy male privilege for many of the early years of my life. So I could spot the casual misogyny.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Where someone would be saying something, or just ignoring me. Like I would be in a room with a bunch of people who were all tossing ideas around. I would say an idea and then they're just still talking. Then a man would say the same thing I did. And then they would listen to him. Yeah. I would, at least because I recognize it, I would then speak up and I would say, no, this was my idea. You're just copying it. And then I would be assertive about taking it. Once in a while, I would have to bring it up saying, you do understand what you just did was casual misogyny. And it said, yeah, because I spoke and you ignored me. And then he spoke and he said the same thing I did. And you listened to him. I have a seat at the table, but unless you listen to me, I'm just window dressing. And of course, I've had my share of people saying, they would go to a man and say, oh, that guy's a go-getter. He's assertive. And then they would go to me and they would say to my face, I am a bitch. Because I'm acting the same way as a guy. But, bitches get shit done.
That's such a great way to look at it. Yeah. That's ridiculous. I can't believe that's still a thing.
Look at it this way. Quite plainly, we have a lot of work to do to wipe out misogyny, racism, homophobia, xenophobia from this country. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of work to do.
As we wrap up the section about being transgender, do you have any advice that you give to young or closeted transgender people?
Well, for one, in my day, you whippersnappers, I got fired immediately, and we didn't know who was trans and who wasn't. Guys have it so easy. Gosh, I wish I was born in the year 2000 or 2010, because then, the very fact that the young can express themselves so freely, I envy you. I envy you so much. But at the same time, we live in a dangerous world. Don't ever let your guard down. Don't think that because, you go to your school and you're showing off your true nature, that creepazoids out there won't try to do something to you. And also, we still have a lot of parents out there that when you come out to them, it's not going to be pretty. However, if you're in a situation like that, once you're 18, you can get the heck out of there, get yourself a job, and be among friends. If they were treated you like crap while you were growing up and couldn't express yourself, while you can't choose your family, you could sure as hell choose who you associate with, and they don't have to be members of your family. And last but not least is there are a lot of us out there. We are everywhere. And so you are not alone.
Becky Heineman, thank you so much for coming on the show, giving us your story, and taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me onto your show. And of course, if anybody wants to follow me, I'm Burger Becky on Twitter and on YouTube. I sometimes do channels, and on Twitch TV.
Yeah,
and
basically any of the socials. If it's online, Burger Becky will get you to her.
Exactly. And of course, my company's name is Old School, OLDESKUUL.com.